Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So I like to start by offering my greetings and welcoming everyone this evening. Um, so this morning we had our in-person program, and one of the laymen at the program was talking to me about the world and about a lot of the big issues and problems going on in the world. And one of them in particular. And I was telling him it really reminded me of this one story from the Dhammapada commentary. So the Dhammapada is a one of the books, one of the parts of the Tipitaka. It's in this Sutta Pitaka, and it's a collection of these short sayings, these short teachings by the Buddha. So in the Dhammapada commentary, there's all the stories which led to these utterances, these teachings of the Buddha. And so the Dhammapada commentary was written hundreds of years after the time of the Buddha. So some people don't like it. Some people just write it off altogether and think, okay, well, these stories were maybe made up later. Other ones think, okay, well, these stories, they probably are original. So, different people have different views on whether the Dhammapada commentaries were accurate or not. But I think regardless of, your feelings on that, one of the things is these are really good teaching stories. So, the same idea, were Aesop's fables true or not? Regardless of whether they were, they actually really meant to teach us something. And so some of these background stories can give, and the Dhammapada commentary stories can give some really beautiful teachings in themselves, or really bring some of these verses to life. So one of the ones which I really like in these situations in the world really reminded me of was I think it's Dhammapada 291, and the story is there's this lady, and she had a hen, and she would, whenever the hen would lay an egg, she'd take the eggs and eat it. So the hen was like specifically for its eggs. But the hen didn't like this because, and was very angry because the lady who owned her was eating all of her young, basically eating all of her children to be. And so she swore revenge. She swore vengeance on this lady. And so the next life, um, the hen was born as a cat, and the lady was actually herself born as a hen. And so whenever she laid eggs, the cat, out of revenge, would kill her children, to get even, get back at her for the lady having eaten her children in the past. And then so now the lady who's now the hen, she swore revenge on the cat for eating her young. And it goes on and on like this, back through life after life, that these two women keep killing each other's children and then swearing revenge for it. And it just keeps going back and forth, this constant cycle of revenge and getting even. And then finally they um, end up going to see the Buddha in the time of the Buddha, and the Buddha's able to teach them and able to get them to stop this. And uh, and one of the verses, it's not the verse from the story itself, but one of the verses which, can sometimes get associated with this story too, is this one: hatred is not overcome by hatred, but only through loving kindness. And so it can really remind me of some of these issues in the world, that, there is this constant, he did this to me, I've got to get back at him. And then it goes in this, very destructive cycle, like, like the kind of the famous, the Hatfields and McCoys, in America, these two families which had this blood feud going on. and it just kept going back and forth until the government had to intervene. And so it can be like this. And one of the things about this is a lot of times, it comes down to there's a lot of dosa, a lot of anger, a lot of like rage people have with that. And one of the problems is when you start getting into these situations of, back and forth, and you can see it in your own life, people at work, friends, or people who used to be friends, family, and it becomes this constant cycle of revenge and, getting back and forth. And it really can illustrate one of the dangers of anger, is um, it can be really, we can mistake it for wisdom, and we can really mistake it for uh like intelligence, because it has this quality to it where very it's similar to discerning. We can it This anger, you can really analyze and you can really pick things apart. You can say, oh well, he did this and this to me and he shouldn't have done this, and that's why he's wrong, and this is why I'm right. And but it's not wisdom, it's really just anger. And sometimes you're right. Like sometimes it's like, objectively, oh, he shouldn't have done that to me, but he did. And even if, someone did do something to us, uh that anger is never right. That anger is never correct. The Buddha was very explicit in the fact that, there isn't justifiable anger. There isn't uh there's no any time where having that anger, that dosa, is justifiable. So um he gave this really beautiful simile for it. It's a very well known, it's called the simile of the saw. And I remember when I was a junior monk at Wat Pah Nanachat, every once in a while there would be a sutta reading. And I remember the abbot at the time, he said, whenever he didn't know which sutta to read, this was always his go back sutta. It was the simile of the saw. So it's this very famous simile where the Buddha was said, even if two strong men using a two-handled saw, and so, that would be like, the closest thing they had then to like a chainsaw, right? So that was, nowadays it would be a chainsaw. We're to cut you limb from limb with a two-handed saw. Even then, you shouldn't have anger towards them. You should have a heart of loving kindness towards them, which is, this is really like big, like, someone doing something like that to you, just absolutely awful. And the idea that you should still have loving kindness towards them, that even in that situation, there's no justification for this righteous indignation. Now, that doesn't mean you should just passively let people do that to you, Obviously, if someone's going to do that, don't let them and get out. But the Buddha was saying, even in those times, we need to keep our mind pure. We need to look after ourselves and look after our own minds. So it's never justifiable. But a lot of times nowadays, and I think it's always been like this. A lot of things in the world will try to justify that anger, or encourage us to be angry, to be worked up. And so, in our practice, we're going against that and we're trying to let go of that anger. We're trying to get rid of it, really cut it out. But all of us, we all have, dosa or anger in us. It's obviously it's like on a spectrum, and we all have different amounts, and we all relate to it very differently. So the Buddha again gave, he gave so many beautiful similes. And one of them he gave for different people and their anger is he compared it to making inscriptions. So he said, there's one type of person, and he said they're like if you're making an inscription in stone. So he said these people are ones who are quick to anger, and that anger lasts a long time. So being an inscription in stone, it's similar. If someone carves something into stone, it's going to be there for a really long time, but it won't be there forever. Eventually the wind, the rain, and just nature and the environment will just wear it down and it'll disappear. It'll take a lot of time. So he said some people are like that. And I think we've all known people like that in our lives who, who just very short fuse and they'll just hold the grudge and they'll be angry about something for a long time. They're those people you always kind of tiptoe around, walking on eggshells. And but then the Buddha said there's another type of person, and he said he compared them to making an engraving or an inscription into dirt, into soil, into the earth. And he said these people are also quick to anger, but their anger disappears quickly. So it's the same as like in dirt, you draw something with your finger in the dirt, it won't take that long for it to disappear. The wind, just the natural erosion, and it'll eventually disappear. And but then the Buddha said there's a third type of person, and he compared them to making an inscription or a carving into water. And he said these people are ones who are slow to anger. And when they do get angry, it disappears very quickly. And so again, we've all met these kind of people in life, they just seem kind of those, cool, relaxed people, don't seem to get ruffled up very often, but they do, at some point, and then, but they can get over it quickly. And so, and so the Buddha is saying this to really illustrate that it is a spectrum. We all have it until we're an anagami, so we all have it to some point. But just because we have it, and even if we're on the more extreme side, it's not always going to be like that. With work, we can improve it. We can reduce this anger, and then eventually we can really cut it out. And so, um, And you might be thinking, okay, like why cut it out? Well, anger, like again, in the another another one of these really great similes of the Buddha is when he was talking about the five hindrances, when he was talking about the hindrance of ill will. So you have all these ones, ill will, anger, aversion, but we can all clump them together. And and he said he was for all the different hindrances, he was comparing it to looking into a bowl of water and trying to see the bottom. And he compared when the mind is overcome by ill will, he said it's like a bowl of trying to look to the bottom of a bowl of boiling water. And I think this simile really does a great job of conveying anger and the feeling of it and the way it affects your mind. So, it has that quality of it's hot. There's an energy to it too. There's a power, like you see when a lot of people get angry, they feel you feel it in your body. Some people can't sit still, or some people they can't even sleep at night. They get so angry and so worked up. So it has that power and heat to it, like the boiling water, but it's also you don't see things clearly. So if you're trying to look into like a bowl of boiling water, you're not going to see the bottom. And it's the same when like anger really like encompasses our mind. We don't see things clearly. It kind of intoxicates the mind and changes the way we see things. So for example, say you know someone and you're at work and you think he's done something and he gets you angry and it just starts spinning in your head and you're just like, oh yeah, he forgot to do that project, he was supposed to do this, and he's always like this, and you just start going on and you're just complaining about this person and everything he's ever done and said is wrong. And then all of a sudden you find out, oh wait, he actually did do the project. It was done correctly. He didn't do anything wrong. And then you watch and your mind just flips and it's like, actually he's not that bad of a guy. Yeah, he is pretty diligent. He does these and he likes to help out. And like when you have moments like that, it really becomes clear how much that anger, how much really just affects the way you're thinking and completely changes the way you're thinking. And so again, one of these real drawbacks of it. And of course, when, anger consumes the mind, um, you can really do, and it has that like changes the way you're thinking and seeing situations and perceiving situations. You can really do something that you're going to regret, even though in the time it feels really justified. It feels like, this is the thing to do. You can really regret it. So I remember there was a Tibetan saying, and it was one moment of anger can ruin an entire lifetime of merit. And you can really see this, for example, say you're working at a job and you've studied for this job, you've been working it as a career, and then you do something at there um and it can just ruin the job. You lose your temper, you scream at your boss or you hit your boss, and all that work you put into that job can now be gone, or it can happen in relationships. It can happen in all kinds of things. So, when this anger consumes the mind, it can becomes really dangerous. But one of the upsides of anger, though, is it's much easier to remove and get rid of than the other kilesas, the other defilements. So you have greed, hatred, and delusion, and anger. That hatred, that's the easiest one to get rid of, and it is because it's so clear. It's more clear to see. Sometimes it is harder to see, but generally it's more clear to see than greed and delusion. And not only is it more clear to see, it's so unpleasant. Like it's like when you're talking about something like greed, it can sometimes like feel good. It can feel right. I always use the example. It's like when you're eating a really nice piece of cake or something, there's these pleasant feelings which come with it. And that's, just the nature. But when it's anger, there's always very unpleasant feelings with it. You feel it in your chest, you feel it in your body. It's just everything about it feels um, unpleasant, feels discomfort. And so that way, and it has this kind of wrong feeling to it. So when that happens, it's easier to see, it's easier to get rid of. And so to get rid of it, we have to put an effort, and we have to do a sustained thing to reduce our anger and get rid of it. So the first thing is actually really knowing when we're angry. So, I was just saying how, it can be very clear to see. Um, for the most part, it is, but sometimes it can be more difficult. And depending on the person, it can be more difficult. Um, so I remember when I was a junior monk, I was living at Wat Mop John, and there was this one American monk there. And he was someone, his character was an anger type. He got irritated and angry pretty easily. And it was very clear for everyone to see who knew him. I remember one time some of the monks, we were sitting down and chatting, and one of the monks said, "Oh, like angry people like us." And, referring to this American monk. And he got so angry at this. And he was like, "What? I'm not an angry person. No, that's not my character at all." And he was, really got angry about it. And the rest of us were just like, "Oh, buddy, like you don't see this? Like, really?" And no one said anything because again, he is that anger type. But for us, it was so clear to see. But sometimes what can happen is you get just so used to having something like that, having a mind state like that, or having one of these defilements like that, that sometimes you get used to it and you just think that's always there. So it's like might have just this low level irritation just with you all the time. And you get to the point where you don't really see it. You might see it when like the real big anger comes up, but you just don't see the other. So it's very much like, someone who, has like smells bad and they get so used to their own smell that they don't realize that they smell bad. Everyone else can smell it, but they can't smell it themselves. But it's only once they've really cleaned themselves, washed their clothes, got rid of that smell, that then later, if that smell starts coming back, then they can see and be like, okay, yeah, that I noticed that. That's unpleasant now. So it's important for us to, really be able to see that anger. And it's important when the anger does start coming up. If you do start getting, you find you're getting really angry about something, um, to when you do see it and you do realize it, it's really good to try to cut it off as quickly as we can, because one of the things is the more we feed it, the more it's going to grow. So sometimes, say someone does something to you, gets you angry. You notice a lot of times it starts off small. You just think, "Oh, I can't believe he did that. He shouldn't have done that." But then you keep thinking about it, and it kind of starts spinning around, and you get more and more and more angry about it. And so it just starts growing and gets bigger and bigger. So it's really important then for us to cut that off, as early as possible when it is quite small and easier to take care of. And we can work at actively developing the opposite of anger. So, actively developing metta, loving kindness. And, one is in our meditation, bringing up that emotion, bringing up that feeling of loving kindness and getting our mind used to it and making it easier to bring up. But we also don't want to just keep it in our meditation. We want to try to develop it in our life and in our interactions with other people. So like I was saying, in the mind, start cutting off those thoughts of anger in the mind and bring up thoughts of loving kindness in the mind. Also through our actions, through our speech. If, we're sitting and doing our meditation and just blissing out on loving kindness, but then we get up and go about our days and we're, saying nasty things to people or cutting people down or hitting people or doing all kinds of, really expressing that anger outwardly, it's not going to really be improving our lives. So we want to take that externally through our actions, through our speech, through our thinking throughout the day, and really develop that loving kindness and developing the opposite of that anger, the opposite of that hatred. And then what we're going to see is it's going to start reducing. It's going to start um, shrinking. It's going to start. We're going to get more positive mind states. And if we keep this up, we're going to really be able to improve our lives. Reduce our suffering, and improve our happiness. And then that loving kindness itself, that can really act as a great foundation to really help us with our meditation and developing our samadhi and taking it deeper. So one of the things, um, when the Buddha would talk about meditation, a lot of times he'd start off by saying, giving up covetousness and grief for the world. So, because anger and aversion, it's very much like there's so much attachment to it. There's so much like we always think of attachment as just the things we like, the good things, the positive things. So I'm attached to these objects or attached to these people or attached to these thoughts, and it's very good things. But aversion, there's so much attachment to aversion as well. It is aversion, it is attachment, but the other side of it. So think about, say, for example, if you're in your day, say you go to work and someone comes up and says something nice to you or does something nice to you, and then another person comes up and does something mean to you or says something nasty to you, which one are you going to be thinking about more afterwards? Which one do you think you're going to be holding on to more? And then, of course, the extreme examples are like, grudges, where someone, they become so attached to something bad which has happened to them, or their anger or their dislike of someone, and they created so much of a sense of self around that. And so again, learning to let go of that and brighten the mind with our loving kindness, with our metta, this is going to help our meditation. And one of the ways that Buddha would talk about for developing samadhi, he would say, um, pamoja leads to piti, leads to pasadi, leads to sukha, leads to samadhi. So he said pamoja, like gladness, leads to rapture, leads to tranquility, leads to bliss, leads to concentration, or that meditative absorption. So that bringing up that gladness in the mind, that happiness in the mind, which we can get from loving kindness. And so that's going to really help us with our practice too. And I remember, Lumpur Biek was teaching, he was saying that, sometimes when you're meditating, you may find that your mind is, really staying with the breath. Like it's not wandering off. You're not thinking a lot. You're staying with the breath, but you're not really getting any pity, any of that rapture coming up. And he said, in cases like that, he said, intentionally bring up uh pity, intentionally bring up that rapture. So he said, he would recommend doing it through body contemplation, but I always found doing it through metta was really nice and really easy to do. And so yeah, so when we do really commit ourselves to giving up this anger, when we see it as um, something detrimental and we see that it's not a good thing, it's not a justifiable thing, and we really work on developing the opposite, it's going to bring nothing but benefits to ourselves, to our lives, to our meditation, and to the people around us. So I'd like to offer that as a bit of a reflection for everyone this evening.